my passion. So let me just continue here. My passion for the tiny homes movement, and a special big thank you for everyone at Brighton Hove for hosting this event and allowing me to gatecrash a monthly meeting yet again, and for all their brilliant support and facilitation up to this point. Personally, I want to get the whole world talking about tiny homes, discussing what they are, who they might benefit, where they can be sited, the different benefits and challenges, and how they might address the multiple crises of housing, environment, economy, equality, and well-being that we're seeing today. So tiny homes aren't just scaled down houses or an excuse for a cramped flat. They are individual, bespoke, quality designed and well-built dwellings. They might be a home on wheels, a converted shipping container, a kit home, or a modular unit that can be customised. But generally, they measure below the minimum space standards. And of course, tiny is relative to the individual. So I'm delighted to say that we have a total of 6 speakers this evening. And I'd like to say another personal thank you for giving up your evenings to be here. All our speakers are dedicated to their work in the field and will be taking questions after their talk. After the presentations, we'll be allocated breakout rooms for half an hour, which will be self-facilitated and provide space for more in-depth discussions on all aspects of tiny home living, and to consider perhaps the following question. Is there anything that you might hear this evening that will inspire you to take some action? When we come back together at the end, each group will be nominating someone to name one thing, either by speaking or perhaps a sentence in the chat box. And I'm sure that you'll find this whole evening very stimulating indeed. So without further ado, please let me introduce Charles Harrison, who's my co-conspirator for this event. He will speak first with Jim from Sussex Homeless Support. Welcome to Charles and Jim.
Thank you very much, Erica. Yes, I'm just going to enable screen share, and Jim and I will explain a bit about the work of Sussex Homeless Support and the pod prototype. So if you can just bear with me, I'll just find the slide. Yes, we do. Right. There, hopefully. Perhaps I can ask Jim Deans to talk first about what Sussex Homeless Support does, and then when he's finished his bit, I'll then explain a bit about the design and construction of our first prototype. So, Jim Deans.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks everybody for inviting us along tonight. It's quite exciting times for us. End of COVID and businesses booming in not a very good way. So Sussex Home Support really is about 7 years old. It became a charity 3 years ago, but I've been feeding people in the street for a long time, not just here in the UK, but in Los Angeles as well. I've worked in Paris, I've worked in New York, and so I had an opportunity 7 years ago to step away from my own business and spend more time helping people on the street. I was former homeless, so I've got a very good understanding of you know what the guys go through. And so Sussex Home Support started feeding people in the street, and now it pretty much does everything from feeding people to clothing them, giving them toiletries, giving them support. We advocate for them. We take on the big guys, the councils and the DWP, and have even been at the Royal Courts of Justice on behalf of a disabled homeless person. So there's not really much we don't do in the world of homeless, but what we identified very early on was the fact that this was a tap that was never going to turn off. The homeless numbers grew and grew, and despite politicians trying to kid us on that there was nobody on the street. You know, we knew we were feeding 150, 160 people that were homeless. And so the answer really was, without housing, there's never going to be an end. And so therefore, really, we started looking at the possibility of housing. And here in Brighton, we even looked at buying a house. You know, but I think I'm pretty sure everybody's probably aware of the fact that the cost in housing in this city is just crazy, and that means it relates all the way back to the rent, everything else. So you're trapped in poverty, you're trapped in debt, and almost definitely you turn to drink, you turn to drugs, you turn to all this means whatsoever, begging in the street just to pay rent. And so we decided we were going to look at building our own houses. And that was looking in China originally. So we started looking in China at these prefabricated kit houses that arrived 4 in a flat black. And we looked at, you know, container homes, but we discounted them because we looked at them and seen they have as many problems as they have good points. And then we got together with a local architect who convinced us completely that the way to go was to design our own home, have it how we wanted it, keep it simple, because we have a saying that's sanity through simplicity. Just keeping it nice and simple means the guys going in there don't have the complexity of like 5 light switches to switch one light bulb on. So keeping it nice and simple also meant to keep the costs down. So we started off designing it. We joined the Community Land Trust, which was amazing because the support they gave us in the early days and still to today was fantastic. You know, really, without Andrea, I would have given up on any idea whatsoever because I'm not technically trained. So therefore, she managed to take all the complexity and make it simple for me to understand. And so we're at the stage now where I'm sure Charles is going to tell you we've built our first home. It's 85% done, and it fits on a trailer, and you've seen pictures of it, and I've towed it behind us as refugee. So I think probably now is a good time for Charles to give you a bit about the technical side of what makes it so exciting.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Jim. This is the, so as Jim explained, we've had a lot of help from local architect Stuart Henton, I think several years ago he came up with this visualization of what a pod could look like. So hopefully on your screens you can see some 3D images, and basically we were trying to come up with a structure that was about 2.5 meters wide and no more than 6 meters long, so that it could be towed legally behind a normal vehicle. It doesn't have wheels, it is self-supporting, but it can be put on a trailer, as we'll show. It is self-contained, it has its own loo, kitchen, sleeping, living, and everything. So everything a person needs is in this unit. It's very well insulated, and it is constructed in SIP panels, that's structurally insulated panels, which is basically a sandwich of 2 pieces of sterling board with insulation bonded in the middle. And they are very, very strong components, and they're jointed together, and also there are ring beams, high and low levels, so the whole thing is so rigid you could lift up one corner and it wouldn't sag anywhere. It's made to be low impact on the environment, so it can be screwed. The foundations are ground screws, so we don't have to be involved in any concrete in the foundations. It's well insulated. The windows are triple glazed. The roof is in like a Hyperlon material, EDPM, so it's very long lasting. We were very meticulous about airtight construction, so we had Tyvek barrier, and in the fit out we want to include mechanical ventilation of heat recovery, so that you can have a continuous supply of fresh air without losing any of the heat. This is the build. So some time ago we had a workshop full of stacks of these components, which we then and the architect Stuart Henton, in the top middle picture, he's the tall guy to the left of the picture. This photo was taken of various where we have Councillor Nikki Brennan, two lecturers senior lecturers from the University of Brighton, the architect Stuart Henton. So this gives an idea of how it was put together. And it can be done by anybody, but it does need to be done correctly, and it has to be done accurately. Otherwise, things find you can't fit things together. And in the final stages, although a lot of the build was done by the architect Stuart Henton, Jim, myself, my son, various others, there were also some of the homeless clients. The one in the top left-hand corner, he'd broken his wrist, he couldn't work, and so he'd been homeless, and so he was actually helping us with the build. So these are relocatable. They can be, well, we moved it around the workshop on supermarket on these little movable four-wheeled caster trolleys, and it was lifted onto a trailer or onto a lorry with a lorry-mounted high-up lift, so it then can then be towed around. And I think that concludes the presentation for Sussex Homeless Support. We'll be open to any questions or comments that anybody would like to raise. I'm just going to stop my screen share now. There, right. So if anyone has any questions, perhaps you can put them in the chat. I don't know whether Peter is. Did you say?
Yeah. So we've got we've got time for a couple of questions, I reckon. So if someone else wants to get them in, there's a question here that from Sam, says, Jim, this looks like a fantastic project. Has any consideration been given to using non-toxic renewable construction materials for the SIP panels on future design iterations?
Shall I?
Yeah, Charles.
Yes, I appreciate there are some limitations of SIP panels in that they it's basically wood chippings glued together, and also the insulation is a foam insulation. I think it's something we I mean, this is probably something we could do with some help on, actually, and some advice. I mean, there are other materials you can make panels with. Cross-laminated timber. One of the organisations under the CLT has used those very successfully, but there may be others. I must admit, I've gone off Kingspan in the wake of Grenfell. I think they came up with the concept. So it is something we'd like to look at. So I don't know, hopefully it answers your question.
Cool, and a couple more questions. One, how much does it weigh? Quickly, how much does it weigh?
I think it was the architect came up with some calculations. I think he estimated 4 tonne, but I think that's a bit. I think it was a bit on the heavy side. I think somewhere between 2 and 4 tonne, depending on what you put in it.
And what is the what's the cost?
We had a cost plan for the materials and any specialist contractors of about 15,000. That was the budget we were trying to work to. It does get a bit difficult to keep to a budget when, well, on the prototype, we were having to do a lot of ad hoc purchasing because from time to time we'd run out of screws and we had to go down to the local trade counters. So I think on production versions we can get much better with the costs and we can work out and more accurate material buying schedules.
All right, so there's a lot more questions, and we don't have there's some ones that are more general. But I think we will go into at the end of all the speakers because I think some people might cover them, which are about kind of where can you locate it, is it legal to live in it full time, and what restrictions are there as to where they can be installed. So if it's all right, I'm going to leave those questions until the end, because I'm aware of time, or the end of the speakers, and we'll go back to them. We will save this chat because there's some nice offers here of help with more environmentally friendly panels, some contacts and things like that, a question about land for building on. There's one more that's specific about this, which I'm going to say, can you answer really quickly and then we'll move on. Can they be stacked? Or are they open to being joined to second pods?
I don't think there's any reason why they can't be stacked. This construction is monocoque, so it all acts as one continuous structure, and I think they could be stacked. But I think we're trying to avoid that. We don't want to have a load of shipping containers stacked up. We want to try and keep it reasonably low rise and everybody with access to green space. So the answer is yes, but I think we'd probably avoid it.
I think thanks everybody for the questions. Like I say, questions about kind of land and legality, if they're not touched on, maybe we can have a quick chat together about that at the end. But shall we move on to whoever's next?
Yes, I think just to finish off, I think if anybody has any questions, we can arrange a separate session to because we're coming in early stages. So yes, we can deal with those late at another date. Yes, the next speaker is a vice chair of the Town and Country Planning Association. Hopefully, I've got that right. Diane Smith will talk about the 20-minute neighbourhood and some of the planning aspects. So Diane, the floor is yours.
Now unmuted. Thanks, Charles and Jim. That was very interesting and very, very hopeful. So I'm going to now try to share my screen with you. And I'm hoping that's working. So I'm going to talk primarily about the 20-minute neighbourhood. So not specifically about tiny homes, but to try to conceptualise how they would fit within the 20-minute neighbourhood, because they would be, in my opinion, a very important part of the housing tenure that would be needed for thriving communities. Right. Presentation decided not to move on. Okay. Right, just bear with me. There we go. I work for Town and Country, well, I did, I'm retired now, Town and Country Planning Association, and some of you may know that that was indeed the brainchild of Ebenezer Howard, who was the creator really of the first garden city, not the first garden city, but first social housing. It was a radical approach to try and get everybody housed in a decent environment, in a good home. And for the Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust people, the bottom paragraph is interesting because the Garden City principle was, of course, that the income from rising land values was kept within the community, supporting the local economy and the welfare of residents. Those were the days, really. That is no longer the case. But although in Letchworth, they do indeed still reap the benefits of the land value capture. So what is it? Well, it could be 20 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it could be 15, it could be 800 meters, it could be 500 meters. It's not worth getting hung up on what the distance is. The point is that it is a walkable distance from where you live to try and take advantage of and benefit from all the things that you may need on your day-to-day living. Interesting, and being the Town and Country Planning Association, that diverse and affordable homes are at the top of that principle, which is all very well if you're building them now, but in fact we're retrofitting ideally neighbourhoods that exist already. So there isn't time to read out to you all of those things on the outer circle, but I think you get the feeling, you'll understand that it is really an holistic approach to planning, which is what we were trying to achieve. The benefits are quite extensive. So health, social and inclusivity, economic and environmental. Health, I think, again, during COVID, it's become very obvious that physical activity is increasingly important. And I've chosen here quite a few of the economic arguments on health, apart from the obvious ones about health benefits, mental health benefits in particular. And the reason for doing that is that you need an economic argument to make anything happen. And if the investment in local living, in good provision, in addressing mental and physical health locally can actually show an economic benefit, then you're much more likely to get things changed. Food is also a very natural course of good health, but the 20-minute neighbourhood, again going back to garden cities, also looked at how you can provide food locally, and it's increasingly happening across Brighton and Hove, I'm delighted to say. But you know, the councils can help. They can look at areas, designate areas for doing this, and I think we could all try and encourage more of that. Inclusivity is important. It provides a sort of safety net apart from anything else, so that people feel part of a community, and the warning signs of people that are lonely, are having other mental health problems can be much more easily identified. There's a greater perception of safety, it's more inclusive, and you get to know your neighbours. The economies are also self-evident, although the car owners and others might argue that they have to park outside their shop every time they want something. There's actually evidence to prove that isn't the case. The environment also improves, of course, through climate change, reduced car use, more green spaces, air quality is better, and more biodiversity. So on the housing front, the provision of high quality housing is fundamental to new and existing 20-minute neighbourhoods. You must have an integrated mix of housing tenures to reflect local housing need, and people need supporting through all stages of their life. The community-led housing projects, of course, and planners and others on the council need to make much more effort on co-housing, self-build or community land and community land trust. But it's within this concept that the local provision of tiny homes, I think, could have a tremendous contribution to make. It's a grassroots approach to identify need and then have the enthusiasm to make it happen. The 20-minute neighbourhood, this is an interesting slide just to show different densities. All three of these areas have the same housing density, but the bottom right one, the medium rise with medium coverage design is, as I think you can see, much more supportive of community cohesion, mixed tenure, public spaces, and could, if designed and planned at the beginning, accommodate tiny homes so that they are part of a community rather than a standalone experiment, which it might well be. You always need a range of different types and tenure of homes, something that most councils these days do not really take into account. They look much more for the highest price they can get for the properties that they sell, and it's tragic, but we need to be addressing that as much as we can. I can't really not mention permitted development. I hope you're all familiar with this. You may or may not be, and it's a mixed blessing. It could be a blessing because it's an easy route to getting people in houses or in homes, inside anyway. But as from the 1st of August this year, the latest deregulation of the planning system now says that any building of less than 15,000 square metres can be converted into housing. Minimum space standards may or may not apply, but there will be no careful consideration, as we've seen for the tiny homes approach, on how the space is used. And it does mean, interestingly, that even somewhere like Debenhams in the heart of Churchill Square could be converted into housing. So I think we all have to be very aware that just getting people inside houses and creating homes is not necessarily the only answer. It's where they are, and also that they are included within the local planning system, so that the health, the doctor surgeries know, the schools know, the transport people know that they're going to be there. Why is it relevant now? Very quickly, because of COVID, people are much more conscious of their local neighbourhoods, and there's a much more positive approach to trying to do something locally. And it has, I'm delighted to say, been adopted as a principle by the whole of Brighton and Hove Council last October. It sits in the Community Wealth Building Working Group, and there are plans, no funding, but plans for some pilots across the city. And so it's got to be people power to actually make this happen, which will require, as I say, community partnership, vision, hard and soft measures, and leadership. And just to show you two of my favourite things that may come out of this, this is in Shoreditch, where a 2-car parking space was turned into a seating for 14 people and 8 cycle parking spaces, and the shops increased their turnover. And this is a Transport for London funded scheme whereby you can create edible bus stops and curb gardens all through people power at the grassroots level. So I hope that's helped give a bit of a holistic view of how tiny homes could fit within 20-minute neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Yeah, if people have specific questions, I'm going to, Diane, I know you weren't talking specifically about tiny homes, but wider about 20-minute neighbourhoods. But there's a couple of questions about kind of the planning issues and building regulations for tiny homes. And I know you come from that kind of planning background. Do you think you could sort of say your thoughts about that?
Yes. My organisation is very much in favour of planning. We think good planning can lead to the right neighbourhoods. Visionary planning can lead to really great places for people to live and work. However, the government sees it in a somewhat different way and has systematically deregulated the planning system. One potential advantage of that is that it's a lot easier to make extensions and place things in different places. And within the context of neighbourhood planning, I would say that life is easier now to accommodate the tiny homes projects, but it would depend on public opinion as well, which is why building grassroots support, community cohesion, people understanding why they're needed and who they're needed for is a very big part of the process of getting anything built anywhere. And I think that that will be a bigger problem than the technicality of getting planning permission.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any more questions? Any more questions specifically on 20-minute neighbourhoods? And the ones that are about, we're going to come back to the ones that are about kind of finding, locating land, I think, for a little bit afterwards. All right. Thanks, Diane. That's brilliant. Erica, who are we moving on to next?
Yes, so I'd just like to introduce Tim, Stuart and Martin. If you are happy to introduce yourselves roughly in that order, that would be absolutely fantastic. And then Martin, at the end of your 10 minutes, if you could hand back to me, please, that would be great. I'm really so impressed with what I've heard so far, and I'm really looking forward to the next 3. So thank you very much. Over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Tim Mason. I'm actually a director of the Wyre Forest Community Land Trust up in Worcestershire. And I was asked by the organiser of this event to give a quick talk about a presentation I gave to our CLT, which is actually about low-cost incremental self-building. My background's in design and as a product designer, and I've sort of spent 32 years in higher education and further education lecturing as well. So my presentation will just be about a different way, which is a stepping stone, possibly beyond tiny houses, is the next step. Are we moving on to the next person for an introduction, or do you want me to carry on?
No, you carry on.
That's fine. Sorry, I thought we all introduced ourselves. Okay. Share screen. Bear with me.
I think you might need to turn on computer sound or something.
Is it not working?
No. So Tim,
right.
Let me talk you through it again. When you go to the share screen option, so if you like stop the screen share and start again, because that's the easiest. When you go to the share screen option, in the bottom left of that window, there's a little tick box that says share sound. And if you tick that tick box, it'll give us your computer sound as well as the
1 minute. Right. So I can't get back to there at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to stop your sharing.
Right, I've stopped it.
You've stopped the sharing. So go to share screen again.
1 minute. I'm just making sure I've got the presentation. Yep.
And then can you see in that window there's a like share sound?
Oh yeah, got it. Sorry.
That's oh, sorry. I should have said that when we went through at the start.
Welcome to the Wyre Forest Community Land Trust. Okay. This is a short presentation outlining a self-build project that we are developing. A project which allows people...
Sorry.
Welcome to the Wyre Forest Community Land Trust. This is a short presentation outlining a self-build project that we are developing. A project which allows people with no skills in self-building to engage in a joint project to self-build low-cost houses. The project aims to train local people with the skills they require to participate in a collaborative build alongside the Community Land Trust. We will be building structurally sound homes which are super insulated, cheap to run and built in micro-communities using a modular build off-site construction process. Self-building can help you make a considerable saving on the cost of a house compared to the price charged by a developer. Additionally, by providing labour to fabricate and assemble the modular house, further cost savings can be made. By becoming a member of the Wyre Forest Community Land Trust and joining the Modular Self-Build group, you can take the first step towards the dream of designing and building your own home. Collectively, the micro-community of self-builders will be assisted with clarifying their requirements, designing their house layouts, the communal and shared spaces, and access that meets secured by design standards. creating neighbourhoods with a strong communal bond in homes matched to their needs with the ability to grow or evolve as required. First-time buyers are able to build what they need in a very affordable way and then grow the home as finances allow and their needs change. A cheap, very affordable basic house can be grown into a more desirable home. By investing the financial savings made because of the small loan repayments compared to rent and the low running costs of these houses into improvements and expansions. These modular design timber frame homes are sustainable, super insulated, customizable and structurally sound buildings. Designed to take advantage of small, awkward or sloping sites, this means that significant savings can be made when purchasing land. A training workshop will provide the wood fabrication and health and safety skills required to build the panels for each house. Standard section timber and board is used, which means that materials availability is simple. It even provides the potential for recycled second-hand timber to further reduce costs. The design allows for a high degree of flexibility, including expansion or contraction of the living space. Even reconfiguration of the interior is simple, and reuse of panels on another building is possible. The final appearance of the house, shape and cladding can easily be adapted to meet the local planning requirements. The lightweight nature of the design also means there is little need for expensive concrete foundations, which result in a large cost saving. The post and beam element of the timber frames can also be tailored to the slope of a site, creating an undercroft for storage at the same time as significantly reducing groundwork costs.
Okay, so that's just an overview of one of the projects that we're doing at the Wyre Forest CLT. Part of something we're in discussion with the local council is the idea that it's perfectly possible to build a very small 16-foot by 12-foot unit as a starter home, single story, and that actually becomes the downstairs half of a house. You extend it at the back to double the size, putting a larger kitchen and dining room on the back of it, and then upstairs, where you would have had a loft bedroom and a bathroom, by extending it at the back, you can actually add either 2 more bedrooms or 1 very large bedroom, ensuite and dressing room as well. So the houses themselves can actually just be expanded, and that's part of that sort of concept of working with sort of low-income families, single-parent families, low-income individuals.
Brilliant, thanks, Tim. Maybe I'll ask this, and we'll go back. So one of the questions is about kind of land and locating lands. Have you located specific land for your project in the Wyre Forest CLT?
Yeah,
is that in process? How did you do it?
We've been working very closely with the council and with the Community Housing Association. There's really only a couple of significant housing associations in the Wyre Forest area, one of which took over all the council stock. And we've been chatting with them because they've got all sorts of orphaned bits of land, which are awkward sites, leftover sites, too small to be economically viable for them to develop. And actually, we've got 4 sites with them and a couple of other sites we're chatting about with the council to build sort of small houses on. Because ultimately, what we're doing is you're putting in planning and approval for a full-size house, but you're just building half of it, because that's the affordable bit, and then you expand it. So it overcomes all those problems in many ways of minimum size standards and everything else, because the house will be, you know, meeting all those requirements.
Brilliant, thanks, Tim. Any more questions for Tim? All right, brilliant. That was really interesting. Who are we moving on to next?
I think Charles has got a question actually for Tim, and then we'll be moving on to Stuart.
Oh, go, Charles. Sorry, I didn't spot you.
Oh yes, yes. Sorry, I didn't have time to type in the chat. Yeah, I think your system is really interesting, and I was particularly interested to see the kind of in situ panels that you're making. One of the limitations of the SIP panels are that you have to have to go around windows and junctions. So having a panel that can be made up is quite interesting. So hopefully we can get together and explore whether that can be applied in other cases.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting, happy to chat to that. Basically, the whole design concept has been designed. So we've designed out all the wet trades, and I can run a 12-hour evening class which teaches people all the construction skills they need to build all the panels, health and safety, woodwork, construction. And the biggest panel you make is 8 foot by 4 foot, which means by working with, we work with 4 people at a time on 4 micro houses. 1 person can build all their own panels. It takes 2 people to lift and transport all the panels, so there's no cranes involved in moving things on site, so everything can be put on site. And it takes 4 people to assemble and erect the post and beam frames on site. So the 4 people working on the project work together to build 4 houses as a small micro community, and everything is just standard sized timber that you could go and buy from B&Q if you wanted to, or anywhere like that. You know, it's all just made out of standard timber sections and board, and it's insulated with earth wool, which is sort of environmentally friendly. It's fireproof and reasonably lightweight as well, and provides very, very good 8-inch insulated walls.
It sounds like there are a lot of similarities between your system and the one that we have been using at Sussex Homeless Support, except for the fact that we've used a SIP panel rather than.
Yeah. We deliberately went against the SIP panels because I didn't want to get involved in that sort of factory-based fabrication. So what we've done is we've designed a fabrication centre which fits inside a 20-foot steel container. We lift it on site, we train the people up, you make all the panels, you move the container off site, and then you start building the houses. And the container's gone to another site where you're training up another local group of people to make panels for another project.
Tim, just one last question here that's come. So the question is, you don't need to drive the post into the ground with plant machinery?
No. Depending on whether you're going for a 2-story house or a 3-story house or a single story, many of them, if the ground's hard, they sit on a 2-inch granite concrete slab with compacted ground under it. If you're going higher than that with increased weight, then the most you might do is dig a 60-centimetre circular hole 1 metre deep. You fill it with a plug of concrete and you cap it with a 2-inch granite slab, and the whole house sits on top of that. The idea being that the house could be deconstructed and the concrete plug pulled out and you wouldn't even know you've been on site. So it's been designed to be very sustainable and very environmentally friendly.
Amazing, thanks, Tim. We're going to after this, we're going to share, if it's all right with the people speaking, the slides of people's presentations and contacts if people are happy to. So if there are kind of further questions, we can arrange that. Shall I pass over to Martin? Hi, Martin.
I think Stuart was next in order, but I'm happy to.
I'm jumping in here. I should stop doing it. Erica.
So sorry, Stuart's next on the list, but honestly, it's fine whichever way. And thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Stuart Johnson. I'm from Amazing Grace Spaces. We're a charity in Newport in South Wales. I'll try and do my screen share. If it will work, yes, it does work. Right, so we have come from a slightly different background. We've worked with guys on the streets, etc. We've done night shelters, but cold winter provision shelters with churches to South Wales. Found that there was very little or very good accommodation for them to move on to. If
Stuart, we can't hear you. If you can hear me, maybe stop sharing the, if you turn off your video, maybe stop sharing the presentation, or you could email it to me and I could share it so it uses less of your bandwidth. Okay, let me, can I suggest that we pass over to Martin for now, and I'll try and talk to Stuart to see if we can find a solution to that. Is that good? Cool. Hey, Martin.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'll just start the share. So, yeah, well, I'm coming to you from Cambridge, where we've done a pilot project with 6 relocatable units for homeless people. So that's our focus, is trying to make sure that you know, we use this sort of system to meet the maximum social need. So this isn't about sort of creating sort of alternative lifestyles, it's just sort of responding to the social need. Just as a bit of background, Allia is a social enterprise. I've been going for about 22 years, and we run business centres in Cambridge, Peterborough and Hackney for social and green businesses, and we do a number of other sort of social finance things, including issuing charitable bonds to help charities raise fairly substantial chunks of money for development projects. But yeah, we tried this sort of innovation approach because we're just, you know, deeply upset by the kind of endemic homelessness. Cambridge is a bit of a magnet, as well as having its own local problems. And before the pandemic anyway, massive numbers of street homeless people. And I think the pandemic has shown what can be done given the political will. So we want that political will to continue, but into innovative solutions longer term, not just using hotels and B&Bs and so on. The bottom left shows the Social Bite Edinburgh Village, which are 2-person tiny homes with a big communal unit. They are made of wood, so fantastic, you know, made by Carbon Dynamic. But very eco-friendly and healthy and so on, but they have to be 6 meters apart because of caravan spacing, mobile home regulations for fireproofing. The one on the top right is Bristol, with container units, which we wanted to kind of steer away from. So we ended up sort of commissioning our own unit built by a local social enterprise, which I'll come to. I just can't quite see my notes there. So Cambridge City Council is getting into housing first a bit, not a kind of full-blown thing, but it was certainly something we were able to build on. There's a big citywide partnership called It Takes a City that's now set up a community land trust that I'm a trustee of. Just had a long board meeting before this. We're making some progress on a couple of sites, a couple of further sites. But Cambridge is a really difficult place to find land. It sounds a bit similar to Brighton really, and many other places in the south. So I spent about a year looking around, you know, just alongside my main job at Allia, and eventually found this church site where the church is going to be redeveloped in 2 or 3 years' time. In fact, they said it might even be 18 months, but I basically took a punt because I was so desperate for a site that I took a punt that it would probably take longer. And so far, we've been going for a year on this site, and it looks like every chance that we'll see the full 3-year temporary planning permission and the 3-year lease up in 2 years' time. Fingers crossed on that one. Anyway, the vicar and the church are very happy to let this site be used because they knew it was going to be redeveloped. And cutting a very long story short of planning, and I can talk about the sizes, the 25 square metre units that we use, which were deemed adequate by the planners after a bit of a battle. We had to sort of set a bit of a precedent, which has now enabled other stuff to be done on that basis. So smaller than the space standards, but not permanent dwellings. So 18 months or 2 years is seen as okay. Although the residents in the scheme, which I'll show you in a minute, are generally really like the units, and some of them say they want to live there forever, which is going to be a bit challenging when we pick the units up and move them to another site. But, you know, we may let them, you know, if they haven't found somewhere else, we may be able to sort of allow them to stay for another period of time. Anyway, we didn't have a big budget, so we got some help, pro bono help, which is always useful, from Groundworks and the recycling company Mick George. They did some digging and they gave us some concrete. And the challenge with the tiny homes or the temporary homes, if you're talking about land that is only going to be on a meanwhile basis, because we couldn't have afforded to buy anything or rent anything, land was lent to us free. We still have to do the infrastructure that's a bit like a normal housing project. So it's sort of 75% of the effort really of doing what you would do in a full-scale scheme, which means mains electric, mains water, and mains sewerage, unless you can exchange one of those for a kind of temporary electricity supply or batteries supplemented by mains, lower power mains system, or a pressurized water system using a low pressure supply, or if you can do a sewage digestion system. But all of these in an urban context we didn't need, because we hooked off the church electric and there was a sewage main running just down the car park. The only thing we had to bring in new really was the mains water, which was the same price as buying a pressurization system. So all the piping had to be put underground in a standard depths to avoid freezing and to avoid overheating in the summer. And the build proceeded. We used screw piles, there they are. It all looks a right mess because we offset the units to create a little bit of interest rather than having them in a sort of straight line. But the screw piles were very good, other than the ground being too hard last summer and the screw pile people breaking a couple of their machines. So, you know, it's an innovative solution, but had a few issues. And then these were the units as they came out of a fabrication warehouse lent to us by a local developer. Charity that built them is called New Meaning Foundation. They train local young people and some ex-homeless people on the build, but we couldn't build them on site. I'm intrigued by the previous speaker, Tim, about whether we could sort of create a fabrication on any given site. We've heard about flying factories in the past, but we just, you know, you need a lot of space to build these 6 units, and it was just decided it was easier to build them in a controlled environment and then bring them down on a truck. I'll show you some of the interior pictures in a minute, but they were all craned onto site in about 6 hours last May, mid-May, and the scheme was up and running fully with you know, everything connected and landscape within 4 weeks from that delivery day. So all the effort really is in planning, in the planning application process, which took about 4 months. Had to go to planning committee because a bit of a precedent was set. And you can see it sort of taking shape. More complicated layout than we probably would have done with hindsight, but we could have done it in sort of 3 groups of straight lines, just partially offset to create some more visual interest. There's the team looking happy. The building company gave us lots of concrete. Sorry, not very environmentally friendly, but you know, we needed a solid sort of pathway, so options were a bit limited really. You can see the drainage, sewage manhole covers on the right hand side there, and then that's showing it sort of landscape with some turf and some planters and bits and pieces and a little allotment at the end. The nice porches then get added to create a private space, but also space for interaction as well. So people, the residents really feel they've got their own defensible space, own front door, their door key, but they've got a community there where they're basically all people who probably know each other from having been on the streets, but they've been selected to be the kind of people who get on and willing to live in a bit of a community. There's an informal warden, one of the residents, ex-homeless themselves, but has a little bit more ability to be sort of responsible for the community and is a sort of first responder if anything happens. There's been no problems at all in the whole last year. Inside the unit, it has a nice kitchen. When it's fully furnished, these ones don't show the furnished layout, but there's a table on the left, and then swinging around the other way, you tend to put a sofa in the gap on the left there and a TV on the right, and you're looking through the toilet, bathroom, shower, the MVHR unit in the middle room, and then you walk through to the bedroom at the back. So you know, there's different ways of looking at layout, but we didn't want any corridors with the minimal amount of space we've got, so we went for that sort of layout. Probably could be improved, but that's where we got to. Huge amount of people helped. I won't leave that up for long, but we had to get donors for the money to buy each unit. They were priced at £30,000 when we did it, but they're now more like 45,000 because of price rises and reality kicking in. Lots of pro bono help on planning and the landscaping design, all that sort of stuff, plus the MVHR units were donated and all sorts. And there's some of the donors from their companies looking quite pleased with themselves. So yeah, as I said, the residents do love them. Jimmy's Cambridge is a homeless charity that's providing the support under a contract. Well, they rent the units from us and pay us rent reclaimed through housing benefit at the local housing allowance level, which gives us enough money to put aside to pay for the relocation in 3 years' time, 2 years' time now. And the good thing is Jimmy's then got in pole position to take forward a partnership with Hill, the big developer who you might have seen the Hill Foundation 200 scheme announced, where they're donating 40 units per year for 5 years. And it looks like this, rather lurid orange ones with the leader of the council and some of the key sort of councillors there. Hill are donating these. They're doing 16 in Cambridge. They got nearly all of them through planning, and they're going to do others in other locations. And in fact, they'll do some of them commercially now as well. So they've discovered a new sort of product line. So this is the last slide, and really, I'm not looking forward to when we do have to relocate, because we'll need a new planning permission, and it's a right pain. But fortunately, by working with the Community Land Trust, it's now been set up. I'll probably be able to roll my units into one of their sites, our sites, we're developing together. We've got one site of 10 units we're looking at with the university, donating some surplus land for 5 to 10 years, and another one with the council, probably only 4 units, unfortunately. We'd rather do 6 to 10 really as a sort of viable size. And we're hoping basically to try and create 20 plus units per year until there's basically a housing stock of units that are purely for tackling homelessness. Whether it'll ever be enough, nobody knows really, but we think Cambridge could end up with maybe 100 of these units dotted around in little clusters. Some of them will constantly be moving around, others will stay a bit longer, because 5 to 10 years, as it says there, is a sort of preferable duration. 3 years is a bit too short economically, but it depends how you're funding it really. If you can get donations and grants, you might be able to make that work. Commercially, it probably means more like 15 years, and that would probably almost inevitably be 2 site relocations. But you know, I think these sort of things will evolve, and it will find its level. And if it turns out to be a useful solution, you know, Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government might sort of sponsor this in a bigger way. They're dabbling in it already with the next steps and the Rough Sleepers Accommodation Programme funding, but there's some very tight schedules on that to implement in a period of sort of 7 to 8 months. So that is a pretty tight schedule from beginning to end. So a lot of people are not willing to take the risk on that. We're exploring that, and we've got some consultants looking now at whether we can make this available as a solution for local authorities, housing associations and other partners nationally. And, you know, settling on a price for each unit of around 45 to 50k, unfortunately, with price inflation. And we think a 15k allowance for taking it through planning, getting the right utilities package, installing and landscaping is about right. Some difficult sites will be more expensive. If you've got a larger number of units on it, the unit price might come down. So we think that at 60k all in, that's pretty reasonable, and it is more cost effective long term than trying to buy housing at £300,000-400,000 minimum in a place like Cambridge. So we hope it will be a useful contribution to the national effort in tackling homelessness. Over to you, Helen.
Brilliant, thanks Martin. A question here, have you thought about tiny homes on wheels which are off grid?
We'd love to do it off grid. These units, the reason I asked the question about how much the Sussex ones weigh is because these weigh 11 tons and they're too heavy to put on a trailer of its own, so they have to go on a sort of HGV flatbed. Off grid, it's about the number of sort of solar panels and wind generators or something that you would need to create a viable sustainable electricity supply. So I'd rather go for something like a low power mains cable topping up a battery system. I think that might work. We're getting people to look into that. And low pressure water, that means you don't have to have a main supply and you have a 5,000 quid box that pressurizes the water into each unit. So I think that's about as far as we can, and the sewage digester, sorry, that I mentioned earlier, that is okay as long as the volumes aren't too great. So yeah, I think that will be the thing that means you can recycle those pieces of machinery. Although they've got running costs, it would be cheaper than sort of new mains utilities in each case. Yeah.
And this is a comment, but I'm going to ask you a question because I think it's interesting. The estimates for this, but for the Allia project, are higher than for the Wyre Forest project. From your knowledge of like your project and the presentation there, can you why is that, I guess, is the
Yeah, well, I think self-build is you know, always cheaper as long as you can get the quality right, because it's the labor cost is a huge proportion of the build. It's probably, you know, you get, I think our materials are not much more than the Sussex ones, but you know, maybe 25k. The labor cost, which is trainees, but it's got supervisors as well, and all the other things they have to rent, the tools and bits and pieces. That's what makes it 45, 50k. But I think that is seen in the homelessness sort of world as reasonable value for these units. You can easily pay 60, 70. I saw the TAM unit earlier from Bristol. I mean, I think that's 90k or more. So, you know, there's a range of prices there, and you kind of get what you pay for. But if you build it yourself, you could definitely build it cheaper as long as you're happy with the quality.
Brilliant. And just to say, lots of comments in the chat about like how inspiring it is, how great these projects sound, and how brilliant it is to hear about them. We will save the chat afterwards and send it around to everybody as well, because there were some good questions and also like some references to articles. I'm going to pass over to Erica now.
Okay, hi. I just wanted to say an extra thank you to Martin, especially. There was a bit of confusion about the timing for tonight, and he's coming straight off the back of another CLT meeting. So great respect and thank you, you know, for your extra effort tonight. Very much appreciated. Are we hoping to be able to hear from Stuart?
No, Stuart, we decided, I spoke to him and we decided that the technical issues were unsurmountable this evening. So he's left us now, which is a shame.
Will we be able to share his slideshow, do you think, via a link?
Let's ask him that, because I think it would be really nice for people to kind of get to hear about his project, because obviously he came. So we can ask him about that afterwards, and hopefully we can. Yeah?
Yeah, fantastic.
Brilliant.
And so, yeah, hello again, everyone. And as is coming up in the chat, I'm also just in awe of people who've spoken tonight. And I am the only one here who's not, you know, particularly a professional. And there are so many projects that I would like to tap into, because my interest as a up-and-coming entrepreneur is to network, to share the tiny house story, if you like, and to help grow the tiny house movement. So this kind of stuff is becoming mainstream, not just as a homeless support, not just as a lifestyle choice for an Airbnb in a tiny house, but for all the shades in between, where people are genuinely struggling to get into the housing market and sustain themselves. So as I said, my own interest in tiny homes is personal, and began after watching episodes of Tiny House Nation and living big in a tiny home. But do beware, they are very addictive. And so I became fascinated, not just by the cute and quirky designs, but by the stories of people choosing to live in them full time. Young people, couples, small families, those travelling with work, retirees, all who have a story of why they're choosing to radically downsize. And it wasn't always about money. There's some common threads. So ease, simplicity, freedom, choice, conscience even, living more with less. But tiny homes themselves will need to meet safe minimum standards. Now, this could be based on current caravan legislation, which is the case for some mobile homes we heard touched on in terms of how they're sited. But the traditional sort of tiny home is a small structure on a trailer which can be towed behind a regular car. And because of the very tiny footprint, they usually allow for a loft space. And that kicks it out of the caravan legislation, meaning if it's too tall. Now, quite unbelievably, a caravan definition can be up to 20 meters long. So it doesn't look or on any level feel like a, you know, like a traditional tiny house that you might see on the television. However, the idea is that it is finding a way of making this permanent but portable solution for the housing market, which goes beyond the temporary housing homeless fix or a glamping option. And what I believe is needed is a legal framework to classify the tiny house. You know, the question is, what is a tiny house? So classification will allow for a series of blueprints to enable the rapid and cost-effective production of models that are well designed and well built, adaptable and fit for permanent habitation. Now, this could include self-build templates, as we've seen here, which are ideal for community groups that are able to contribute sweat equity to keep their costs even lower. But with minimum wage earners, for example, only able to access a mortgage of around £45,000, and I've been online and I've done the calculations, the tiny home does have a big job to do. And until our minimum wage reaches the level where we can access an affordable home, a mortgage of £45,000, there is a case to argue that we need to be able to provide a home in law at that price point. And as said here tonight as well, securing the land is key. So a community group in Bristol have recently acquired land from their city council for £1, having competed against developers by means of a social value calculator, which means that they've proved the worth of the development goes well beyond economics. And they are about to submit plans for England's first eco tiny house village, with a common building which is designed to offset the minimal footprint of the individual homes. This is truly groundbreaking, and if successful, will pave the way for others to follow suit. And that is my wish, to see individual communities sharing this template, and almost, if you like, on a franchise basis. It's a very replicable, adaptable model. So there are many other similar initiatives in the pipeline, with the potential for community land trusts to help provide the land once the tiny home has achieved full legal status. And tiny homes can integrate really well into their surrounding environments, matching the local vernacular, being eco-friendly, low impact in their construction, and with minimal running costs and waste. Capable of being fully off-grid, portable to allow for easy relocation as required. Although, as has been said, there can be issues around weight and size for that too. What I wanted to touch on was what's happening elsewhere in the world while we're waiting to catch up here in the UK. And very recently, I've come across a group of citizens in New Zealand who've held a tiny homes expo recently. This was a 2-month event held on public land, free for the public to attend on a daily basis, and where they held workshops with professionals, architects, construction companies, as well as housing and planning officials, to sit around the table and to discuss how the tiny home could be created, classified and created to provide provide permanent habitation. So they've petitioned their local council to trial a temporary 10-year land use permit. Now in England we have, I think, a 3-year window for temporary planning permission. But in New Zealand, their petition, they found a loophole in their law, which I'm going to find out more about. The idea, the temporary land use permit would enable existing landowners to offer home sites on their land for mutual benefit, whilst giving landowners a secure legal path to share land and services with tiny home owners on a temporary basis. Now that has got the potential to dramatically address the housing crisis, not just in New Zealand, but again, could be replicated over here. So permits could be offered to large landowners such as the National Trust, the National Parks, Crown Estates and county farms, all of whom exist to serve the British public, consulting on community level to create bespoke live and work options. So I see tiny home dwellers residing on the land, providing support and services to the local community as well as the landowner, perhaps working part-time and acting as stewards or custodians. I'm just going to share my screen one moment. My particular interest is in the context. As fascinating as the tiny homes are, there's far too many of them to talk about them tonight. but the context in which they can be cited legally, currently only for occupation for 28 days in the UK. So, as said, they can be used for temporary planning for homeless projects, and as bespoke holiday homes where they're being charged out at £100, £150 a night on Airbnb. And I think there's great potential for that end of the market to be exploited to help support the lower end of the market. So some things for us to consider, other scenarios. Rather than me talk through them, just spend a moment. I've spent a year thinking about how could tiny homes benefit the mainstream market, and going to planning and to housing officers to convince them that they're not just going to be littering the countryside. They are very different from the traditional caravan. And actually, what could tiny home dwellers offer in order to kind of barter with the local authorities, so that the tiny house option is seen as a positive contributing opt-in scenario rather than a dropout sort of exploitative scenario, just for very temporary. So this slide will be available through the Brighton and Hove website. They've very kindly offered to host the recording from tonight, but also to share our slides as well. But I think I will just leave you with some questions, and the questions will be, keep asking, what if? These are just a few ideas, and I would really love to hear yours later on in the chat rooms. And after this evening, I will be working on a blog with a view to holding a tiny house pop-up event in the UK, so that a range of tiny homes can be showcased and professionals invited to workshops to hold round-the-table talks with planning and officers here in the UK. I've already had an offer from Bath and West Showground for next Easter, so please keep watching this space. There are lots of tiny house groups available on Facebook for you to join and to find out more. So that's the end of my talk. As I said, I'm looking forward to meeting with some of you in the chat room, in the breakout rooms. But if you've got any questions now, obviously bear in mind I'm not a professional, but I'll answer your questions as best I can, or I'll go off and do some more research. So thank you very much for listening.
Any questions for Erica? All right, so what, any questions for Erica? Or I know there were some kind of generic questions asked earlier about land and building regs, which were touched on through the different presentations. But if anyone feels like they'd still like to find out a bit more, maybe like drop that in the chat again as well. We'll just give a couple of minutes. All right. What we wanted to do now was just give people like a bit of space. Obviously, you've heard a lot about some like really amazing projects, similar, different, the context of tiny homes, the 20-minute neighborhood. And we wanted to give people a chance to like just kind of talk about their interest in tiny homes, you know, some of the questions this has brought up, some of the things that have inspired people. So our plan is now to split people into breakout rooms for kind of 20 minutes, and we're going to pop a few questions. So yeah, what's inspired you? What's your interest? What questions do you have? How might tiny homes fit where you live? And what are the ways that we can use to get them on the housing agenda? So I'm going to write those and send them out to the breakout rooms. If people have to leave, that's obviously totally fine. We're not going to record the breakout rooms, so I'm going to stop the recording. But if you want to leave, leave now. It was great to have you here, and I'll see who's left to get the kind of numbers in the breakout rooms, right? And then I will reassign people. Okay. So Right. Okay, let's do that. No, let's not do that. 1 second while I remove people. So like I say, well, it's just a chance to kind of chat, share experiences, raise questions that you have, like a bit of space. So we'll be in those for 20 minutes and then we will wrap up. I'm going to open the rooms. It's going to tell you to join the breakout rooms and then I'll close them when 20 minutes is up. And as I say, I'll give some like prompt questions in the chat, but also feel free to explore your own kind of avenues around tiny homes. So yeah. All right, so you've been invited to join.